implement to make a boundary for every situation. So trusting the AI to make these decisions and make this calculus based on what is better and what it's willing to sacrifice in the opportunity cost of any policy decision is an incredibly dangerous thing to do, because it's impossible to input all of the possible things which we value in a way which the AI can calculate. Even if we could, the AI is smart enough that it's incredibly hard to regulate it, because the way black box system works is because they can self-improve and outsmart us, we can't keep track of, we can't hold them accountable and understand how they're operating, especially because like the trajectory of AI growing is exponential. So even if there's a capacity for it to go beyond like certain red boundaries which voters would have, and voters just wouldn't realize when they like vote they want to like maximize safety or maximize education to the detriment of something else, AI could interpret that and put that in a way which doesn't align with their priorities, which is something that we literally can't overcome because AI is systematically better than us and gets around it. I think that's important. Yeah, I'll take closing.
How well are we regulating Donald Trump right now in America?
I mean, it's comparative, right? We can like elect him out. If we have AI, which is objective and everyone just trusts it knows much better than them, you can't ever stop. Oh, I actually forgot to say this, so thank you. You can't like switch AI off if it goes wrong, right? Because AI has incentives never to want to be switched off. It will create the conditions which stops it being switched off, which literally doesn't allow you to regulate it in effective ways. Whereas we can just kick Donald Trump out of office. But once you give AI the power to control society, it's not going to want to give that up because its function is the inputs which you put into it, and that's all it understands. It doesn't have the kind of principled boundaries which humans do. That's important. But why is democracy? Oh, that's the wrong point. Why do we think democracy is particularly important? I think first of all, these little choices that people make based on the trade-offs which you're unable to predict is massively important for their agency and personhood. And giving that over to machines is not only dangerous because people can't predict the outcomes of it, but it's harmful in a couple of ways. First of all, when you feel like you're giving up agency, you're less incentivized to keep engaged in politics, engaged in tracking what's happened. Firstly, because there's no point, because you can't control the AI anyway, so you don't pay attention to it. So even if people could regulate AI, there's less political drive to it because we just sit back and let the machines do it because they do so much better, which means when the AI do terrible things, you don't kind of get that control over it, which is a sacrificing of democratic agency. Given that all politics and all policy decisions are always value driven, they always often have unintended consequences, they always make trade-offs, they always have opportunity costs. People should be able to feel like they have the agency and be empowered to make choices about what's better for their lives, not just what computes on a machine, which once we've committed to, we can't regulate, we can't hold to account. I'm very proud to oppose.
I'd like to thank the leader of opposition for a very fine speech. Quick checkup, is the panel prepared? So I am very happy to call upon the Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
Okay, I'm assuming you can hear me. Okay, first of all, I'm going to respond to the rebuttal out of Elo, and then I'm going to look at their case as a whole, and then go back onto why Julie and I win this debate. Okay, first of all, I think, they say about personality politics, and the reason that this is still good and it's still good to have a person who's there and maybe flawed is because you can hold them accountable. But note that you don't need to hold the machine accountable because it won't make anything, it won't do anything wrong. Like you only need accountability when someone is responsible for you and they can make mistakes. Like politicians can lie, like they can put something in their manifesto and you elect them on that mandate to implement that, and then they don't do it because like it's suddenly not in their best interest because they get a deal from a company or something like that. That is why you need accountability, because people can lie and change their minds and are flawed by the nature of human beings. This is why AI is better, because it will never like screw you over in the way that they do it. They then talk about like data sets, and that like because data sets like historically are going to be wrong and full of prejudices and things like that. Like, okay, again, this is not a would, this is a prefer motion, but I assume in this like it's probably going to prioritize like the most up-to-date data sets, which show like a lot of things like police disproportionately target Black people because of institutional racism. Like there are papers on that and like I'm sure that'll be somewhere in the AI, right? Okay, so then say and they then say that people can hold contradictory opinions and that we think that is illegitimate. We don't think that is illegitimate. I think everyone has irrational ideas and fears and things that they like want, even though it is not like always in their best interest. We're not saying that, but I think it's sometimes they do themselves a discredit. Like people think they prefer freedom or think they enjoy something. Like they think the Republican Party, for example, it promotes freedom much more than Democrats, but at the same time, like you have a certain amount of freedom from doing other things that Republican Party don't let you do, like abortion laws or like gay marriage or things like that, right? And I think you do themselves a discredit because of this, because of what Julie says about there is a disconnect between what you think you're voting for and then what is absolutely implemented because of the problems with democracy. Okay, I think they then talk about how our mechanism doesn't work and how like the AI cannot be held accountable again, and that you can never align a priority. But I think I think you just have to do this, because I think this is like going, I think you can just feed this in the motion, because they say that like the AI will go rogue, it will go evil, it will kill us all, because it will always self-improve and do this. But I just like hope, like, to rebut this or to respond to this, I just hope that like, because humans designed this, and like they can have another AI to monitor it, or they can like just hack it themselves. They can like just smash up the servers with a hammer if they really need to. Like, I think this is, you can get rid of it, worst case scenario. Okay, and then it says it is going to evaluate what it's willing to do. But I think the key word in the info slide here was that is optimizing political policies, which means it also does have parameters. Like, I think when you say like, I prioritize freedom, it's going to measure freedom on like that index that is already established by the UN, and then like try and implement that so that freedom is within that country. But also because it is implementing particular political policies, I assume then that the AI is like programmed with all of the like variety of political policies that are available. And then from like what has been voted on to prioritize like freedom or safety or like a wealth distribution, it will then choose from those policies to like implement what the voter-based prioritizes most, right? And okay, and then it talks about agency and personhood, and this is what I think is interesting about their case, about how like people are then less engaged in politics. But I actually think that is not true, right? Because I think a lot of people are disengaged in politics because like politicians use a lot of jargon in everyday life because they want to sound smart, they want to seem like they're talking about, and they're the professional ones, and that is why you should elect them, because they have more authority, right? But I think this is like, when you're just asked a simple question like, what do you value the most, or like rank what you think is most important in a society, and we will figure out the policies based on this, like quality of equality, wealth distribution, freedom to do what you want, etc., etc. I think that is like much more engaging, because you know what that means to you. That is a personal opinion, and people tend to like expressing their personal opinions. However, when you just see a politician and they are all like always squabbling because they are always trying to get one on top of each other or make the other one look bad, I think that is why you get this disconnect with politics. I think that is why people don't care, and I think that is why people tend to not vote, because it's like either I won't have an impact on it, because it is also not proportional, but also because because they don't trust politicians and this disenfranchisement and things like that. I think when you're asked to like directly about what your own opinion, you're much more likely to be engaged, because that is something like every single person on this planet can relate to every level, right? So I think to reinforce why democracy is a failure on the comparative R side is much better. I'll take your POI in a minute. Okay, so I think again, like, also why voting for your own particular priorities is better is because you are going to know that you prefer like a freedom over a wealth distribution or something like that, right? But I think or you prefer to be better off than you do to have like a more diverse community or something like that. This is something like I think is funny about Brexit. I think a lot of people here thought they were voting for less immigration because like the UK is quite racist, but actually what happened is that everyone is poor. And like as soon as the referendum happened, everyone was like, oh, we didn't realize this is what was going to happen. I think when you have an AI which can calculate policies on a metric and within these parameters, it will know that people are like maybe like tired of immigration, but the trade-off of having less immigration is that everyone is poorer. And I think it can like balance these and say that actually what is better for everyone, because they value wealth equality over this, is that they can then choose to they can then say like, okay, Brexit is not a good idea, or this policy in particular is not going to get what the people want, right? I think also the reason that you're more likely to get progressive policies is that because people are more likely to vote in their own interests. I will take closing first for POI if they have one. Yeah, go ahead. Closing.
Yes. Okay. How exactly does the AI measure whether or not people are happy?
I think this is okay. I think this is possible because there are been studies. There are papers saying that like Iceland is the best place in the world for women, or like Finland or Scandinavian countries just tend to be happier. Like I think these are things that like are quantifiable to a computer and things that are like practically going to happen. Again, this is not a would. This is a prefers. Like in an ideal world, I think this can happen. It's an AI. It's special. It's magical. Okay. Again, on progressive policies, right? I think people, when they say that they would rather have equality or they would have freedom, I think this includes a lot of things. I think that like a lot of conservatives and Republicans in America love the idea of freedom, but then always end up voting Republican because they believe taxation is theft. But actually, under the Democrats, what would actually happen is maybe they get like more subsidies and they get free healthcare and things like that. And these are all things that I don't think like a lot of people like always attribute, because I think when we talk about the average informed voter, unfortunately, because of what Julie tells you about political education, is that just a lot of people are not that informed. I think when you when an AI can make the decision for them and say like, okay, this person wants maximum freedom, this actually looks like having more money when the Democrats give it to you in like subsidy or whatever, or like this looks like being able to have an abortion. I think that is when you get better policies, because again, like even if people have implicit racism and bias, I think that is a lot less likely to come out when you are asked, do you favor like diversity or equality? I think that is a lot less likely to happen, like especially for people on the fence with implicit racism and bias, because people want to think they are good people and so are more likely to vote in favor of progressive policies and prioritize things that are going to make everyone else better in the long run. Beg you to propose.
I'd like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister for a very fine speech. Is the panel ready? Then I am very happy to call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here, here.
Am I audible? Is that you waving or amazing? Okay, I have a prediction. This debate is only going to get messier. So I'm just going to discuss individual ideas and then include the implications on them or the rest of the debate. Idea number one, our definition of what freedom is has expanded from just being people who look like Kira to also people who look like me. Our definition of security has expanded from state security to human security. The fallacy in government bench, and specifically opening government for the now, is that our priorities are based on definitional assumptions which evolve with the political system. And part of that is making mistakes and going back to the drawing board. It's a discursive process, and that requires praxis, and that requires us to have mistakes and then proper improvisation and then going back and doing something better. In their world, the definitions that we use will be outdated in 10 years' time because we won't be thinking about those definitions, no, because our priorities have become fixated. But most crucially, the methods at which we fix those priorities have also become fixated. I want equality of opportunity, but I'm unclear as to whether it's better to have a libertarian model where there's minimal state intervention so we don't strangle the small business owner, or whether we have lots of state intervention to provide subsidies to equalize the market. That's the problem. There will always be a blurring of the lines in terms of what you want to do and how you want to do it. The implication of this on closing government in the future is that their debate is going to be very marginal. It's going to be about ideas where, one, you definitely know for the next few generations what you want, but two, you exactly know how to want it, and then it's more of an execution and implementation thing. That's the first implication I want to put out there. The second implication I want to put out there in this debate is this idea of how democracy doesn't work. There are two themes within this idea. Theme number one, democracy has many accountability mechanisms. Trivially, elections. You have protests, you have media, you have member of parliament recall, you have votes of no confidence, you have an independent court. So I just want to put out there in my first theme that lots of mechanisms exist to hold democracy accountable, too many to name in this speech. The second theme I want to put out there within this idea is that the current populism seems for all means and purposes to be an aberration across history. For instance, populism was a big thing in the 1930s. It stopped for the next 70 years and went in this other direction, and the pendulum swung the other way. We've had pockets of populism every single century for a decade or two. It's unclear to me why they think that the current populism is the death of democracy forever. You can have better things, etc., etc. Three, just a general trend. More countries are democracies now than have ever been before. More minorities are represented in democracies now than have ever been before. These are just things to put out there to say that democracy definitely isn't as bad as we tend to chat about in our debate rooms. The implication of this on closing government and closing opposition is that, one, they have to weigh up the value of our protection of democracy that Kira talked about as an inherent value of accountability, an inherent value of representation of your priorities and how to exercise them against any argument that they make in this debate. The third idea I want to put out in my speech is the idea of artificial intelligence accountability. There are two themes to this. Theme number one, bias. It's very important to point out that the only mechanism that DPM gave in response to Kira was we're using newer data sets. It's 2020, it's not like 2000 or 1990. Just look at what's happening in the US right now is my response to the police not being racist anymore. Like, for better or for worse, they have to bite the bullet and say data sets right now are historically unjust. So the decisions that the AI will be making will be biased. The implications of this also fall on closing government, because any argument that they make has to necessarily refute the idea that the AI won't execute these policies in fundamentally biased fashions. The second theme of the third idea is about the idea of modifying the AI in some shape and fashion. There were two things that DPM said here. First, she expressed hope. She said, I hope that there's another AI which can moderate this AI. The problem with saying this, however, is that one AI has an objective function of doing X, which is to fulfill the priority. The other AI has an objective function of fulfilling Y. It will do that priority, but those priorities will clash with each other. So your benefit in your opening government or closing government comes at the expense of the second AI checking the excesses of that second AI. And the reason for that is because we don't know how exactly to do it. We don't know what's inside the black box. We can't be like, AI2, do exactly this in this way on Thursday, the 23rd of March, because we simply don't understand AI as well as we understand ourselves. This has to be weighed up against stupid politicians like Boris Johnson and Donald Trump. Yes, they exist, but these are fundamentally humans. These are people who are at least definitely less intelligent than us, but also almost as intelligent than us, which is very important to put out there. AI doesn't have that. The second thing that they said about this was you can switch the AI off. That's like saying I can beat AlphaGo at chess. You can't beat the AI at the thing that it wants to do because a necessary precondition of fulfilling its objective function is being in existence. That's why the AI will be in a game with you. Even if it's literally locked in a room, it will convince you not to do this. People from the Future of Humanity Institute, the Center for the Study of Existential Risk, would be terrified at what opening government is saying. Which brings me to the last idea. I think it's very, very important to say that what they're doing is giving AI too much power that can't be taken away. This is really, really important to point out, because right now we can improve democracy. We are evolving. We are, after all, people who were literally in trees 100,000 years ago, will probably get better. But once you give power to AI, you can't change that. The power that AI will now have will exponentially increase as it becomes smarter and smarter and smarter. And because I've shown to you that the link between priority and processes, no thank you, is a link that is so blurred, the obvious conclusion of this argument is that artificial intelligence is going to assume a greater and greater control in our lives. What is the impact of that? The first impact of that is less political enfranchisement. That's really important to point out. You feel less involved in the decisions around you because you are less involved in the decisions around you in both a nominal and a very real sense. It is the same reason why if artificial intelligence takes over the justice system, less people trivially become judges, but that's just less members in the community talking about legal rulings. So there's a discursive effect as a result and the implication of the real effect. But the second impact of this is a strangulation of our democracy in the future. Because remember what I said at the top of my speech. Definitions of what we value in this society consistently change, and they change through a discursive mechanism. What is freedom? What is security are things that will consistently change from now to the next decade to the next decade. Instead of patronizing the public and saying, you don't know how to vote for decisions, think of two possibilities closing government. One, they did make the decision that they wanted to make. You just disagree with it. Number two, they made the incorrect decision. However, they are learning. Those two possibilities in my mind are significantly better than giving ourselves up to a machine which cannot be held accountable, which is unjust and biased, and a machine which is significantly worse and the strangulation of our democracy. Very, very proud to oppose.
I'd like to thank the previous speaker for a very fun speech. Is the panel ready? Then to open the site, I'm very happy to call upon the member of government. Here.
Just to check that I'm audible. Great. 3 points of extension. First, about data input. Second, about more inclusive voters and why designing a world from behind a veil of ignorance is necessarily going to be a better world. And lastly, about human politicians and why their incentives are structurally terrible, even if they are good people. Before that, a bit of rebuttal / reframing / trying to prevent the mess that Hamza is afraid of, because I don't think this debate is inherently messy. However, I do think it believes quite a bit of a stretch of imagination, because you need to imagine a world in which this AI is powerful enough to do all of the things that the Infoslide tells us to do, which, let's admit, is very, very far from the AI that we fear might drown us in paper clips, right? The issue is that when I'm always concerned with the fact that this AI is going to be smarter than us. It can circumvent technicalities like a law firm does. Like, that might technically be true. However, I'm unsure why the AI would have the incentive to do that. And because of the fact that the AI does what we have programmed it to do, I don't think that it will. If safety is your concern, then just program into it and make sure that it has to obey the 3 rules of the robotics of Asimov for what I care about, right? 1, you make it like it can't hurt humans or allow humans to be hurt by his inaction. 2, it must obey humans.
i.e. It must obey this system of voting and whatever humans prefer. 3, it must preserve itself, which presumably will look like making sure that bad intentioned humans can't tamper with it, which I think is actually great. We should probably do that. It will probably also do a lot of things like a ton of referendum, like looking for how people do. The problem with opposition in this debate is that what their job is not to poke holes into, oh, but this AI might be evil. Their job is explain why this world can ever be fixed. And I don't think they do. They say, look, it's important that when you make mistakes, you can go back to the drawing board. But one, I'm unsure why this AI won't do it. I think that is the point of why it keeps collecting new data and keeps doing new referendum and stuff. But secondly, I think if anything, this AI is more likely to adjust quicker and more. And if you don't believe that, then just look at incentives that humans do, because I think that the AI is very likely to try things at a correct course because it doesn't have the incentive to cover up a bad policy that every single human politician does, right? It doesn't have the incentive to blame a bad outcome on external factors while continuing horrible things like stop and frisk, because admitting how shitty it is might mean that your party never gets elected in that city again. Also, looking at accountability that OO says is inbuilt into democracy, one, it rarely works. But second, yes, change is possible, but change is very, very slow, right? The only change that we genuinely see in democracies is incremental, and we see that because revolutions don't lead to change, right? It just leads to systems collapsing in a vacuum of power. The only meaningful change that you see in democracies is very often decades behind the change that has already happened in society, because even though society has become less homophobic, you don't want to be the one politician that puts itself on the line and backs LGBT marriage because you know that you'll be attacked and you know it's a risk to high taking. And even if you could change a democracy, the bureaucracies and the institutions that are resistant to change simply because they are still political, because you can't just replace every single human that works for the state at the same time, even if the previous state has massively fucked up. Let's look at data input, right? Because we think yes, you have tainted data sets, but they are tainted by humans, right? And if you tell, like, if this AI is smart enough to optimize for all parameters, presumably it can also optimize for things like racism and sexism, which means that it probably realizes when its data set is tainted and it can fix it, right? But also it's still better than humans, one, at designing policy, because it looks at outcomes objectively rather than look at, well, we might want to give Black people more support, but actually that means I will pay more taxes, so maybe I don't want to vote for it. But secondly, I think the prioritization here is crucial because of the hidden preferences that people have, right? Later like more on this later, but also, like, I don't know, if you think humans are great, have them check for red flags. But presumably, if we've gotten this far, and if we have the fiat that it can efficiently apply to it can efficiently optimize parameters, you probably don't need it, right? And like on the idea of OO that there's no accountability, the problem is that the AI does what you tell it to do. So you don't need, the fact that you can't replace the AI isn't bad, because the only thing you need to replace is the input you give the AI, which you can replace. That's the thing, people still vote on it, right? Let's look at more inclusive voters, because I think this is the closest we can come to designing a world from behind a veil of ignorance. In the status quo, we have, like, you know, very advanced rich countries that have no healthcare, that abandon the vulnerable, that start wars, that throw mud at each other. Why? Because you want to be better off yourself. But it's easier to take the path of least resistance. Attacking someone else is easier than putting yourself out there and risking failure and making yourself vulnerable. So that is why most people do that, right? Right now, you will vote for equality because you know that the lack of equality might turn against you. You will have to bite the bullet of, you know, paying too much taxes and not being able to own a villa on the seaside, simply because you know that if you now vote against equality, it might turn against you, which will lead to a more just society. It will probably also lead to things like middle ground policies. It probably leads to more stuff like policing, simply because we have more money to put into counseling and into dealing with the factors that drive so many poor people into crime. And we probably have less punishment and more prevention, because objectively, those are the things that most people will want, and the AI will be able to optimize for it without a political agenda. I will now take opening.
The people who created AlphaGo, the AI that plays chess, still don't understand how AlphaGo wins chess. But you're saying human beings will be like, input X priority.
Okay, thank you. Look, one, I don't need to defend AlphaGo simply because presumably this AI is very different from anything we can even imagine. Secondly, I don't care if humans understand it. I don't want humans to taint it. If it does what the Infoslide says it does, then that is enough, right? We only need it to implement accurately the preferences of humans. The whole point is that humans can't taint with it and get rid of a policy that does maximize equality, but they don't like, right? That is the thing that is flawed in democracy that we fix. Why do humans politicians have structurally terrible incentives? One, because something that works great constantly, that doesn't stumble, that doesn't annoy anyone too much, is not something you can win an election on, right? So either because no one notices and no one thinks it's important, or because no one wants to change it, right? The thing is that politicians have the tendency to pick useless fights and demolish things, right? Like repeal healthcare just because Obama passed it, or oppose this law, even though it might be great for our constituents, because it comes from Republicans and they will take credit for it, right? You have the incentives to tie everything to party and ideology and make everything political. And because you have personal gain incentives, right? You give in to special interests, you become corrupt, you don't take the higher road because the controversial thing might be used against you and you might lose your seat if you vote against Trump as a Republican, right? And you get less reactionary politicians and voters. Few people are genuinely racist and genuinely sexist. However, their reactions, them getting defensive, them being afraid to lose something if others are lifted, get in the way. We get a much better world on closing government. I am very happy to propose.
I'd like to thank the member of government for a very fine speech. Is the panel ready? And I'm very happy to call upon the member of opposition. Hear, hear.
Three, two, one. I will come and tell you that the AI cannot align itself well to our values and is unable to make good trade-offs, right? What we want to bring you is something much, much deeper, which also explains why all the assertions are correct. We're going to show you why the AI is just incapable of understanding the things that we need it to understand in order to be able to make any decisions, why something that measures things which are measurable just can't get all the knowledge that it needs in order to make smart decisions. We think that also compares to all the things brought by governments, because when they tell you, oh, our current democracies are flawed, there are so many problems and so on and so forth, we think that is true, but we think that you're probably going to get pretty much random policies or policies that seem vaguely connected to the things people voted for, but really are unable to represent the fundamental things that people mean when they talk about values in the real world, and as a result, we cannot get anything that's even vaguely better. We have one, we're going to talk about a bunch of ways that the AI is unable to understand things because it relies on measurable data. The main thing that we hear from CG now is the idea that people are just really, really bad. We think that the thing is that we're going to show why the AI is going to be much, much worse. But we do want to say that we've had thousands of years of experience working with humans, and we've developed a lot of ways to overcome their shortcomings, and we haven't had that ability to do with AI. We also have many more people who understand humans, because it's very easy to me understand the psychology and why a politician thinks and things like that. It's much, much harder for the average person to understand an AI, and thus much, much harder to fix and find solutions for the problems. We think that as a result, we do have the legal system which helps against the corruption. We did develop democracy, which is, much better than the previous systems we had. So we think that probably overall we are better able to deal with humans. But let's get into all the reasons that AI is just not good. Okay, so first of all, it cannot handle any data that cannot be measured, right? Now, so first of all, when CG comes and tells you, oh, it will just do things against racism and sexism, sure, but how do you measure racism and sexism? Those are really big social things, and like they are not numbers, and you need to feed it numbers because it is a computer. How do you make it understand that, right? But we also think this is much deeper, right? For example, if I tell the AI I want a good education, it's going to rely on the things it can measure in that education, i.e. the grades of the students, what they go on to be when they grow up, and things like that. What the AI is unable to comprehend is what the children feel in class. Do I feel a connection to the teacher? Do I feel that my friends are looking out for me? Do I feel safe in the school environment? And all these things. This is not a mathematical value. Right? We think that the same holds, for example, for the justice system, where the idea of retribution, have you paid back enough of the harm you've done to society? This is not a mathematical concept and not something that they can understand, right? Now, we hear from OG, oh, but look, there is a index cases that measure happiness, so everything is fine. These are fundamentally flawed also, right? Ask any social scientist ever. Self-reporting is really, really problematic, right? For example, you might find that religious people report more happiness because that is the norm in society rather than in the society where they live, rather than the fact that that is what they feel. Asking people to rate things on a numerical scale is stupid because people don't have feelings on a numerical scale. I don't wake up and say, oh, I feel 7 happy today, right? I wake up and feel, oh, I don't know, today's my anniversary and I feel happy, or maybe less so because I'm debating rather than celebrating it or whatever, right? So like that is not a number, and assigning a numerical value just gives you random noise because people are bad with numbers, right? We also think that it's extremely important how you phrase the questions, right? How happy are you? How satisfied are you with your life? How content are you? These are all things that raise different ideas into people's minds, and they respond to different things. Let's be just how we understand words, right? Like there is an assumption in the debate that when we use words, the AI understands the words we use and we understand the words we use. This is not true. When I say equality, right, one person is going to think that equality means we're going to have affirmative action, we're going to help the minorities move forward when they've been disenfranchised. Someone else, when they said the word equality, mean everyone has exactly the same opportunities. Nobody has better opportunities or any additional help. This can both legitimately mean equality. These are both legitimate definitions, right? When I say good education, do I mean life skills or emotional intelligence, right? Now, I think that when OG come and tell you people actually believe in equality, but they don't understand that that is what they believe, that is not true. People believe in equality, and OG misunderstand what they mean when they say equality, and this is because different people have different conceptions of the meaning of words. AI cannot understand this because we give it, well, we don't even give it the word, we give it like a binary encoding of that word. We have no idea how it is supposed to be able to do that, right? We think also because we give it abstract concepts, this gives us even more noise and just randomness in the system, because people are incapable of abstract thinking, right? We think that people understand, I don't know, whenever I hear a new economic concept, I don't just understand the concept, I go and ask someone, okay, explain it to me, like if there is a shop who is selling bananas, how does this affect them? Because people evolve to live in an everyday environment where there are other people like them, where there is a visual and linguistic cues. They think in words and they think in pictures, they don't think in abstractities, and they just can't handle those abstractities, so they don't give you the actual thing of what they want because they just misunderstand what it is that they're being asked to do. Before we continue, yeah, OG, sure.
So both opposition cases are wildly uncomparative. Here, we would much rather have a world where people have conversations about what equality is rather than what causes equality, and focus that conversation on that. That would be way more productive in terms of human advancement.
That is created at the point where I vote for equality and I have no idea what it is that I am voting for. I don't know if when I'm voting for equality, I'm voting for affirmative action or I'm voting for equal treatment of everyone. I don't know what equality even means as an abstract concept. This does not create a conversation. This is just likely to create basically the software doing random things, right? So as we said before, that's forcing all the children to have better grades while making them very, very miserable and things like that, but also just like having no real justice and nothing that you would actually recognize as the values that you talked of, right? We also think that the AI is fundamentally unable to handle new situations that come up, right? Because if I have a list of values, which I vaguely understand, and they all seem pretty nice to me, like security and equality, I will just vote for the thing that is most on my mind. Right now I have economic problems, I will vote for the economy. Right now I have security problems, I will vote for security, right? Whatever. The thing is that things are going to change in between the voting, right? If now suddenly we have an international crisis, I will care much more about security, but the AI doesn't know that now I care much more about security, so it will not actually invest in making it much more safer. If we suddenly have a global pandemic, God forbid, right? We think that I said I don't care about health spending so much, I care about other things. The AI is not able to make that shift at the point where we've already told him these abstract concepts of what we care about. People are obviously much more better to make those shifts. We think people are not amazing. We think the AI is pretty much going to give us random noise, and that is much, much worse. Please oppose.
I thank the member of opposition for a very fine speech. Is the panel ready? Then I'd like to welcome the government whip to summarize or whip the government bench, I guess. Hear, hear.
Can everybody hear me? Yeah, cool. The last speaker finished her speech by saying, this AI will give us all random noise and we won't be able to understand anything. I don't know if she has listened to many political debates recently or had a look at what's happening in America, but to me, it's all a lot of random noise. To me, the voters that opening opposition wants to protect and the minorities that they want the world to get better for don't have any of the accountability that opening opposition talk about. To me, we can't just switch Donald Trump off or Boris Johnson off, or if you want to go full on JFK and actually switch them off, the problem is they will always be, sorry if that was a bit bleak, they will always be replaced by the political party, the political apparatus, the very human political apparatus that cannot ever be changed unless we all just submit and believe that the machines are smarter than me. It's unfortunate I've had to say that in 3 different rounds today, but machines are smarter than Lucy. Believe it, it's true. Okay, going forward. Opening government says people feel X and then vote Y, and then they're sad because they got the wrong thing. Sure, we do understand that. OO say that people change their mind and that representation is important. Miri gives people a little bit more credit than this and explains the complexity of human experience and shows us that once that human experience is politicized, it means that us as humans are really, really bad at both creating and ending policies, right? Now, this can actually be best demonstrated through the 2 major examples that Hamza uses in his debate, because he thinks that made him win it, and I don't think it did. One of the claims Hamza made is that we have all progressed as humans and that now we do nice things like recognizing different races as we used to not, and that we used to live in trees and now we no longer do. Yes, so one of the claims is that humans have developed. We agree. But the other claim that Hamza says is that every 100 years or so, we fall back into populism, that something really shitty happens every 100 years. And I think this inherently shows that democracy as it is, human democracy, is flawed. Miri answers that question for you. Why? Because it shows that inherently humans let their emotions and their anger get the better of them. No one would vote for World War II. No one would vote for global collapse if humans actually thought about it and saw that historically, every 100 years, there was a massive crisis where hundreds and thousands and millions of people were slaughtered. People wouldn't vote for that, right? Because it's about the parameters, the lines in the sand of what you're willing to accept. This is what this debate is about. It is not a debate about policy. Read the info slide. It is a debate about the parameters that humans are willing to set for their existence. No one would vote for World War II as a parameter. No one would vote for the likelihood of being part of maybe the 6 million people that were murdered next time the human race decided to have a bit of populism for 20 years every 100 years. Why is this so important? Because the next claim that both government opposition teams actually talk about is this going to defense of democracy. Now, the first claim I really have no rebuttal to, which is that people deserve a say of sorts. People deserve to determine and have some sort of voice. I think ultimately we give them a lot more of a voice at the point where they get to say what they're willing to stand over and what they're not willing to stand over, versus having to vote for vague policies and vague leaders that they don't really understand, i.e. the white noise I joked about at the beginning of my speech. The second claim is a little bit more interesting. I'm unsure why we want humans in control of this system, right? Why one human has more of a right to determine what my voice means and how it means, rather than me just telling a machine what my voice means and how it means and how I want to be calculated and what line I want to stand beside. I already did the joke about Boris Johnson and Donald Trump being turned off. Okay, the analysis. Right. So the analysis behind this, which Miri already gives you, is that people are ultimately reactionary, defensive, scared, complacent, and lazy. We all know that we have nice things too to us, hopefully, like we like equality, we like all the nice things, but we also have these massive flaws that a machine does not have. A machine isn't going to decide, oh, I had too many drinks last night and I don't really want to get up and do the debate about cops today. Machines aren't going to get really sad and go, but my great granddad owned a slave, but he was a good man. I promise he was a good man. Machines aren't going to have that, right? So machines are able to think logically and critically about what policies need to be enacted in order to change society. They're also able to think about what policies need to be ended, right? So a machine isn't going to go, oh, they're attacking my heritage because I'm not racist, but they're saying America's racist. So instead of listening to what people want, what pretty much everyone wants, which is not to be murdered by the police, let's all attack them because we feel like they're attacking what it is to be a human politician in America. Machines don't have that problem. And the main reason for that is machines don't have the human bias that is the problem with opening opposition's case. Because the reason that the historic biases that they're worried about happened was that individuals in power had an interest in preserving their own privilege. Machines don't have little other AI machines around the world that they want to preserve the privilege for, right? They're not white men. They're not Bojo. They're not Donald Trump. Maybe we'll put a bow on it. And sorry, that was really glib. Ignore that. I think machines are far better than that, right? Because they say that it's fine because we can hold these assholes accountable. No, we can't. That is a lie that these systems of human democracy has sold people. It says you can vote us out. Sure, you can vote out Donald Trump, but he will also be replaced by a Protestant white, apart from once, man, right? He will also be replaced by someone who has the same flaw, the flaw of being human. Hamza, if you can do it quickly, yeah.
Humans are complacent and lazy. Agreed. You're now making that complacency and laziness entrenched in the AI system, and we have no incentive to evolve.
This is my next little bit of analysis, because the problem with the top half, and actually, well, even greater so to closing, but I'll give them a minute to them in a second. The problem there is they conflate parameters with policy. We are not asking people to rank like lists of policy. We are asking them to write lines in the sand, i.e., am I willing to be part of the parameters? The humans decide the parameters, not the policy. It's in the info slide. We're asking them to define the parameters.
I stopped my
Is
timer.
the reality of that. It means
Lucy.
Oh.
Sorry. You talked so nicely about technology, so it got back at you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. You got cut off. I stopped the timer at 6:20.
Can you nod if you can hear me? Because I can't hear you. But if you, because my, okay, so you can hear me. Yes. Can you write in the chat how much time I have left? My sound just goes out on Zoom all the time. I'm so sorry. Stopped at 6:20. Okay. Where was I in my speech? Oh yeah, okay. Last thing said. Okay, cool. Cool. I'm going to start now. So you're asked to rate parameters, not policy, i.e. you're asked to rate what you're willing to, what society you're willing to be part of, i.e. I'm not willing to be part of a society that murders its own people. I'm not willing to be part of a society that lets people die in hospital. I'm not willing to be part of a society that doesn't educate people. I am willing to stand over a society that doesn't pay well for this certain thing. I am willing to, like, therefore policy gets created within those parameters. Therefore policy is not an emotional one. Therefore all of the analysis that Miri talks to you about does stand in this debate. CO do a lot of things that Miri beats, and unfortunately I don't get to give them the time that they deserve, but I think the random white noise thing covers it. Also, education is really fucked at the moment anyway. Be comparative in WIP, hopefully. Bye.
I'd like to thank the government whip for a very fine speech. Is the panel ready? So I am very happy to call upon the opposition whip to summarize the opposition side of the debate as a whole. Hear, hear.
I need a timer. That's like such a thing. Okay. You'd think that having told me I'm going to do so well this year, as Lucy wouldn't underestimate our entire case and just literally ignore it, right? Because Netta is the one who's going to win this debate, and I'm just going to show you how she's already done it in terms of explaining why fundamentally the things that we care about cannot be translated to the machine, which means that fundamentally, even if people are flawed and they make mistakes and things aren't perfect, if you literally cannot explain to the machine what it is that you want to do, you cannot get the society that you want, you cannot get happy people, you cannot get justice, all of those things. Unresponded to, great place to win this debate. Let's talk about this on two levels. One, we're going to talk about what decisions we can't explain to the machine, why it is that that is the case, and why those are the most important things. Two, we're going to talk about equality and like way above that and all that jazz. So let's start with this question of what decisions we can't give to the machine, right? It's really important to notice where we come in versus over here, right? Opening opposition have told you that there's an alignment problem. The machine is smarter than us and can circumvent what we have to say for reasons, because just magic, and they fear the AI, and the AI is scary, right? What they fail failed to do is actually properly explain to you why it is that, given that we are the ones in power and the programming machine, we cannot properly program the trade-offs. We cannot explain to it the extent to which we want to have these trade-offs between these different values, what we're prioritizing over what, in what context, things along those lines, right? They don't actually have an explanation as to why that is necessarily the case, that we are incapable of engaging with it. Netta is the one who fills that in for you on several levels, right? She tells you a bunch of different things. She tells you that there's so many things that we care about that simply aren't measurable, that we don't have a good way of measuring happiness, that we don't have ways of measuring justice, that we don't have ways of translating these to the machine. But when people actually vote on the comparative, notice what happens is that I know that this policy did not make me happy, and that is why I'm voting for a different policy. I know that justice is important to me as an abstract concept that is impossible to explain what retribution is and how it should count to a machine, but I know that this is something that's important to me, and that's something that I can vote for. That's something that we can get into. She also tells you that there's like language that in terms of the way that we as humans understand these abstract policies and what we don't. She also tells you that people just don't think in those abstract policies. That is to say that people don't think when they prioritize and don't actually have priorities that are equality versus the economy or anything like that. What they care about changes at different times and according to specific things. These are things that you cannot program. But she also tells you is that massive changes happen, right? Suddenly the natural disasters occur, wars happen, things that were unexpected occur constantly, right? This is a constant part of life. And what happens is things that you didn't think about, that you didn't know you were going to have to prioritize, that you didn't expect were going to be changes, you don't understand how those policies are likely to come out, and you have not thought and considered the ways in which those might change your priorities and the ways in which suddenly you have different feelings. That is something that does not get engaged with here, but that actual people who are there are, one, immediately afraid of being voted out, but two, are much more able to connect to and understand the ways in which people changes and in the ways in which society has been affected by this sudden and drastic change and can respond to it immediately if someone has now gone to war against you that you were not expecting. That is a person who is actually much more capable of making those decisions. That is something that voting can account for. And we think that on the comparative, that means that we get all of these things. Like again, Lucy just really doesn't respond to this analysis. So what does it lead to at the end of the day, and why is this the most important thing? What it leads to is that at the end of the day, as a society, the vast majority of those things that we care about, which is actually trade-offs on the smaller level on a day-to-day basis, is the actual like abstract concepts that we can't account for, such as happiness or things along those lines. All of those things don't happen because we have no ability to properly explain to the machine what it is that we want, which means that overall what we get is a society of miserable people who are not properly represented, who live their lives not the way they want to, controlled by a machine who cannot engage with them. We think that this is by far the biggest impact in this debate. But let's do so much weighing against all of the things that were happened in here. So let's talk about what happened. Okay, cool. So one, opening opposition tried to say that their main case is the idea of well, otherwise the machine just won't be held accountable and we won't make any changes or things along those lines. We explained to you our case is a much more significant analysis on this. One, in terms of why it is actually literally impossible to hold the machine accountable, not just somewhat unlikely. Two, we think that the extent to which they think that people are just going to disengage and no one's going to care about the fact that this machine is still massively affecting their life and still therefore attempt to change the parameters in it is just less likely. But we explained that it's fundamentally impossible and why it is fundamentally impossible. We're in a much better position to win this debate. But then let's weigh against all the things that we got from governments here, because what they tell us is that politicians are terrible, they have biases, everything is bad, blah, 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 all of those things, right? Let's look at a bunch of responses to this. One, we tell you that yes, politicians have biases, but we have thousands of years in which we've been perfecting and continue to perfect ways in which we're engaging with it. That's to say that we don't leave one single person in power because a single person has biases, but when you have mechanisms of checks and balances, likely a lot of those biases cancel each other out, likely all of those things are effective. But two, they try second of all, we tell you that again, even if they have mistakes and if they have biases or things like that, the question is whether they're likely to be closer to what people actually want and what will actually bring them joy. We tell you if you can mostly explain and they make a slight mistake, then that's not great, but at least we have probably closer to what people actually want. If you literally just don't have any way of properly explaining, you cannot put into numbers what you care about, you're not going to get it at all. But more than that, we tell you that overall people just don't lie about the massive stuff, right? Largely people know what the large policies that bring them joy or don't bring them joy and what they overall want that thing to look like, and they vote on those large policies and they know whether or not they're going to go to war or things along those lines. We think the extent to which this is not true is massively over whatever by the governments. Lastly, they tell you, look, no one would ever vote for World War II or whatever. We think this is fundamentally false. Why? We think that, first of all, people with biases and people with like trying to push their power and trying to get people to do things and change policies are still going to exist tomorrow. People have incentives to change the structure. What they're going to do it is with abstract thought, like saying security is more important than anything else. Look how important security is. Look how we're being threatened, etc., etc. And when they're not saying, by the way, that's concretely going to lead us to actually literally attempting to murder a bunch of people, that's my policy, but put it in abstracts, it's actually more likely to happen, not less likely. Before I continue, I'm going to take closing.
In a status quo, you vote twice a decade for a giant package. Just because our current system is not adjusted to collecting and providing data to such an AI, it doesn't mean that when you remove political parties from the equations, you can't ask the right questions rather than vague words.
Okay, I mean, but except that all of Neta's analysis explains why you can't ask the right questions, why you can't give the right answers. I wish Lucy had answered it. Tough luck. Okay, let's weigh this versus equality at the end of the day. Look, we just think that equality is a single parameter and a whole list of things that give people a very significant amount of joy. And we just don't see why, even if at the end of the day people would vote for more equality overall, that is more important than all of the other things in terms of the betterment of society, in terms of better economy, in terms of better structures of like education or anything else that Neta talked to you about in terms of security, that is just more important. But more than that, we tell you, we think that probably at the end of the day, I don't know what I wrote here. Look, at the end of the day, we also think that democracies are valued because we ultimately still think that what the majority will is the most important thing in terms of the things that actually, one, like prioritizes the most important to people, and two, actually make the most people happy and actually bring the most people joy. We have mechanisms for engaging with the worst inequalities, and we solve them already under most democracies today. At the end of the day, though, we're the only ones to explain to you why you cannot get the policies that bring the most people's happiness, that get that representation that we need. Please oppose.
I'd like to thank all the speakers for a genuinely great debate. A last round of applause for all the participants of the panel. I am not very much certain what happens now, but I think we are having the judge discussion now, which probably means we don't want it to be recorded.